Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, a trade war or no trade war? That is the question. I get up close with an eminent trade leader, an international banker for emerging economies, and a captain of industry, who all weigh in on the prospects of a bigger battle over tariffs between China and the U.S. So let's open our show today with a look at trade between China and the United States. U.S. President Donald Trump's order to impose tariffs on about $60 billion worth of Chinese goods has raised the fear of a potential trade war. The Chinese Commerce Ministry says that the U.S. approach to tariffs typifies trade protectionism and a Cold War mentality. Commerce Ministry spokesperson Gao Feng said at a media briefing in Beijing that such measures violate international free trade law. Gao added that the measures can negatively impact American consumers and won't benefit either China or the U.S. He said that China has the confidence to deal with any protectionist behavior and hopes that Washington could take steps to fix differences through dialogue.
我们注意到
We are aware of the discussions in the U.S., but China will not change its position. We hope the U.S. will follow the rules of the global economy and free trade. The door for negotiations remains open, but we must first abandon protectionist behaviors, and discussions must be equal. China is against any forced dialogue proposed under pressure and force.
You're watching World Insight. Now, a trade war between China and the United States would be a disaster for the whole world. We all understand that. However, some are optimistic that the two sides could fix the disputes despite tariffs of about $60 billion on Chinese goods. Pascal Lamy is one of those. As former Director General of the World Trade Organization, he believes the strong business ties between China and the U.S. would bring the two back to negotiation. We interviewed him after his important meetings with some of the important leaders coming from both countries. Let's listen in. Mr. Lamy, welcome to my show.
Pleasure.
One of the things we need to have your comments on latest spar between China and the United States, trade disputes. Is it heading for disaster?
There's a small risk, but I think overall they both have a very strong interest that it does not degenerate in a trade war.
Kevin Rudd said 50-50. What do you think?
I'd say 20-80.
80 meaning having hope.
Yeah.
Of being
80% probabilities they will handle this tension properly, rationally. There will be a negotiation, whether bilateral or multilateral. 20% it doesn't work, and then there's a much bigger shock, which would be costly both for US, for China, and by the way, also for Europe.
Yeah, when you are saying 80% of having hope, what are some of the factors that would help us to have the hope? Which factors are you looking at closely now to help us understand what is likely to happen?
Depends a bit on what the US are after. Now, if they're after reducing the trade deficit between US and China by 100 billion, forget it, this is not a trade issue. If they are after blowing up the WTO, forget it, this will not work. If they are after improving the US position vis-à-vis China in trade, in security matters, then there is, in my view, room for a proper negotiation, both US and China on the one side, and US, China, Europe, Japan, India within the World Trade Organization.
How much can we figure out about domestic politics inside the United States? Because it's going to have a big impact on the current motives of the White House.
You're absolutely correct. The main reason why they have this offensive position vis-à-vis China in trade is domestic politics. That's what Trump said he would do during his campaign. He needs to show to the people who voted for him that he's handling this cheating China the right way. Now, whether this will drag the whole American system in this direction or not remains an open question. After all, there are lots of businesses in the US who fear a US-China trade war. Lots of Republicans are not protectionists. They know that the US have benefited a lot from the open trade system. So part of the game will be played between now and November, which are the midterm elections, within the US.
Yeah, but at the same time, the president has a lot to say about trade policy.
Yes, although Article 1 of the US Constitution says that the responsibility for treaties of commerce with foreigners and Indians lies with Congress.
Having said that, though, Mr. Lamy, one of the most crucial things is whether this spark of trade between two countries going to drag down the overall international trade system. I'm sure that's one of the biggest your concerns as well. Can China and the European countries, or in other words, China and the EU, be partners in preventing that from happening?
I think what China and EU can do together with India, with Indonesia, with Mexico, with Canada, with Australia, is protect the WTO system.
How?
In creating a situation where if the US want to exit WTO, or if they want to blow up WTO, there will be a coalition that will say, we keep the WTO within ourselves, a sort of WTO minus US. We have this now on climate change. We have this in UNESCO. After all, we may enter a situation where the US may not be the indispensable partner in every direction. And I think there is a very strong, long-term, deeply rooted interest for keeping a rules-based multilateral trading system.
But Mr. Lamy, you know better than I do that countries are already lining up when it comes to steel and aluminum, even though it is only small money. But countries are lining up trying to ask for exceptions coming from the United States. It seems that this coalition is not necessarily being forced right now.
As far as Europe is concerned, and as far as I know, Europe has, for the moment, been exempted of these US sanctions for reasons that have to do with the fact that European countries and most EU members are allied to the US within NATO, and that the ground that this has to do with national security just doesn't float. So it's not a question of negotiating something, it's a question that the ground which Trump says he has to take these measures is just not there.
If that is the case, will the countries be able to line up firmly together with China and some of the others in order to protect the international trade system? Because they are safe for now and they can rest.
My view on this is, again, plan A is let's negotiate. The US have problems with WTO. They have problems with the jurisprudence of the court of WTO. Fine. What's your problem? We also have problems. China has problems. India has problems. Let's negotiate a package that will lead to improvements in the way the WTO works.
But
if that doesn't work, let's keep a solid WTO, even if the US don't like it.
But Mr. Lamy, time. That's the most important factor. Now the US is delaying the appointment of the judges to the appellate court, and that could delay the overall process of the WTO, not to mention handle some of the issues when it comes to deal with the fundamental issues of structure issues of WTO.
You're right. For the moment, the US have blocked the appointment of judges in the appellate body of the WTO.
Yeah.
There is a solution to that.
What is it?
Solution is let's create an appellate body in WTO with judges which are not appointed by the US but by other members. If the US don't want to be part of that, fine, don't be part of that. But we will stick to this rules-based system and we will abide by the determination of this patch of an appellate body. So it's again, same solution. appellate body without the US, like we have. I think most countries are thinking in this direction, but are waiting to see whether Trump is bark or bite. If it's just bark, let's wait. If it really bites, let's move.
What do you think, bark or bite?
I think there are signals in two directions.
That's what they want you to feel.
One of us this morning, and don't ask me who it was, said, you should be careful. For the moment, you take Trump literally and not very seriously. You're wrong. You should take him seriously, but not literally. I think this goes a long way to understanding the US position.
What about the future of WTO? You yourself were personally involved in it for years. You yourself have witnessed the problems related to it. Namely, one of the biggest world's economy is not committed anymore before you left your post. So fundamentally, what is happening to WTO? Will WTO be the hope?
For the moment, the answer is yes. Not least because the US, who on the one side block the court, take China to the court. So there's a bit of a contradiction in blocking the court and taking China or others to the court. Now, let's leave that aside. Can such a big organization work without the US? That's something which is difficult to imagine. But mind you, if the US exit WTO, they will also exit the insurance which WTO members have against protectionism when they are members.
But they don't care, probably.
Well, they probably would care because they still are heavily dependent on the international trade. The US economy has a big breathing system with the rest of the world, with Canada, with Mexico, with Latin America, with China, with Europe. It's an economy which is plunged into the world totally interconnected economic system. So assume a country in Latin America decides that US intellectual property rules as enshrined in the WTO system do not matter anymore. That probably would be at a big cost for US pharmaceutical industries.
Where is WTO going? What do you think is the immediate roadmap now that the WTO countries, economies, had to work on for preventing the biggest collateral damage right now?
I think the major danger is damaging the WTO as a system. So it should be protected. China, Europe, Japan, India, Africa should coalesce to protect the WTO. And then it should keep moving forward in adjusting the rules of world trade to a changing technology in areas like digitalization, like data flows, like data protection, like where servers should be localized, in things like e-commerce, in things like small businesses. There are quite a large number of areas where updating the WTO rulebook would make a lot of sense, and this would go, in my view, in the right direction.
Our economies all have problems of our own. Our systems all have problems of our own. While at the same time, the international system urgently needs to be readjusted. It seems that everything happened at the same time, and that is the issue, isn't it? How could you clean your own house while at the same time say, let's have an alliance so that we can embrace the best spring? That's always the distance between the reality and the dream and the hope.
Let's be clear. The present world economy is doing extremely well. All engines are pulling in the right direction. We've never had as much growth for the last 10 years. So it is also a good moment to address a number of problems we have in common, such as, for instance, inequalities or climate change. And this is something which is easier to do in a good economic environment like the one we have for the moment than in bad times. So let's use that spring to a good effect.
Spring is coming. Let's celebrate
Absolutely.
it to make the best use of it. Mr. Lamy, what a
My pleasure
to see you again. Pascal Lamy, former Director General of the World Trade Organization, talking about hope out of the chaos right now, particularly when it comes to dispute between China and the United States on the trade issues. Stay with us here on World Insight, still to come on our program. So how concerned are multilateral banking institutions in the possible trade war? I asked Leslie Masdorf, the New Development Bank chief, who says the broad world consensus still supports a rules-based trading system. The full interview right after this break.
Gear up for risks, lift up the poorest, and clear up the skies. These are all in the new blueprint laid out in this year's 2 sessions.
Clarity and consistency of China's policies are healthier and stronger.
Now with another hurdle, a looming battle over trade.
Shooting yourself in the feet.
Also the challenge about the alternative.
How can China leap through its highest hurdles and contribute to the world? Tune in to World Insight with Tian Wei for a special New Blueprint, New Contributions.
In this episode of Travelogue, as part of the Pearl River series, we're visiting Shaguan City, that's in the northern part of Guangdong Province. I'll be sampling the visual delights of picturesque Mount Dansha and soaking up the cultural and historical heritage of the Hakka people.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all. The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
You're still watching World Insight, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN, and I'm Tian Wei. The $60 billion in import costs on Chinese goods imposed by the U.S. President Donald Trump could be a direct challenge to the WTO and even to the established rules-based international trade order. Leslie Masdorf, the vice president of the New Development Bank, told me the importance of the existing global trade system. He emphasized that economies should resolve their grievance through negotiation within the established multilateral framework. We have a lot of changing situation in our world. The U.S.-China trade issue is one of it. The question is whether the international community would still safeguard the international trade system and also safeguard the world order.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I would say that there's no question that globalization and trade opening has benefited the world. I think, it's an indisputed fact that the world is better off today with a global trading system that is based on rules, right? So the issue is not so much for what we need now is maybe greater protections. You know, if people are unhappy with the system, I believe, and I'm not a trade specialist myself, but I believe that it has to be negotiated. I don't think that, you know, trade wars will benefit anyone. It won't benefit China, it won't benefit the US, it won't benefit any of the large economies, nor will it benefit emerging markets. Whatever changes needs to be made has to be negotiated, because a multilateral system has been established after the Second World War. As you know, Bretton Woods institutions emerged, the World Trade Organization emerged. So I think there are appropriate forums out there to negotiate and define new rules of the game if the rules are outmoded.
But the question is whether that rule is likely to be broken. And that is going to be detrimental to the world, including to multilateral banks like yours. You know, on what basis would you operate?
I think that the multilateral system today is dependent on that kind of broad consensus. I think the idea that one or two countries can dislodge that, it's no longer possible. I mean, the world is so interconnected in so many respects, not just in terms of trade, in terms of finance, global movement of people. Even, you know, China or the US or UK, France, EU cannot opt out of what is a global and a multilateral system. Our bank, together with the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, all of these institutions were set up by treaties agreed on by many countries. Right. In the case of the World Bank, 188 countries. In our case, by 5 large economies.
Emerging economies.
And those are multilateral agreements. If one party has some grievances, I think it's important for those to be subjected back to discussions in those forums. But it shouldn't be done outside of the system. I think that's what most people have been saying here over the last 2 days. What I've been hearing, people are saying there is an established system. Let's try and find and modify rules within the system to ensure we can still have prosperous economic growth.
The other party would complain about the inefficiency of those platforms. They would also complain about what they see as unfair reactions from those platforms. How do you see these kinds of more looking internally rather than looking at the bigger picture vision that some of the economies has acquired over the years?
I think all the voices that I've heard today, in all the talks that I've listened to, everyone is saying that increasing protectionism is not the answer. It is not the solution. There might be legitimate problems being raised, but we know for sure that a trade war is a zero-sum game. You will have tit for tat, and it will not take us in any new place where we will be better off.
Yeah.
So I think once we move from that starting point, the enabling environment is there to find some consensus.
The 5 members involved in the BRICS that are shareholders of your new development bank are all having very direct trade relations with the United States. I just wonder, within these countries, how much consensus is there to maintain what you have already have, which is the new development bank, and also in a way to cultivate this platform so that it play a more significant role, it play a more balanced role? Can you really do anything for what is going on right now in the world?
I think, look, within multilateral relations, countries also have bilateral relations with each other. So the new development bank is an embodiment of this desire, this intent by emerging markets to have a bigger voice in the world economy. So the BRICS countries, especially China, India, Brazil, these are large economies that have now claimed a bigger voice. They also have relations with the EU, they have trading partners with the United States, Canada, and other large economies. The two are not inconsistent with each other. It doesn't mean because we are trying to build a greater say for the BRICS countries in the global system that goes against the other relations that exist. What is profoundly negative about what is currently happening is that economic power is being used to exercise, and one should really use public policy and negotiated platforms to resolve issues rather than using force and power.
The 2 sessions, together with the 19th Party Congress, has adopted this blueprint for China's development. In the next 3 years, 3 major battlegrounds, as they say. One is eliminating poverty, extreme poverty, that's what we're talking about. The other is try to help to protect the environment, The third is reduce the risks in the financial sector.
Yeah.
Every one of these tasks has something to do with the mission of your bank.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the most exciting parts about the CDF this year is this focus on quality growth, this focus on moving away from quantity. Over the last 40 years, as you know, there's been this huge focus on China achieving the right level of growth, and China succeeded in lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. That is an amazing achievement. However, it came with significant cost. Firstly, environmental degradation. The quality of air, you know, out there in large major cities in China. Levels of inequality are extremely high. So what China intends to do now, and the lessons of this is also there for BRICS, is to look at quality growth. How can we ensure that in the next phase going forward, we deal with inequality? We ensure that whilst we have growth, that we have more innovation in the economy, that we remove the financial fragility, for example, that has caused the financial crisis. An economy can grow. Look at Iceland. It was a spectacular success at one stage, and then it was a spectacular failure after the financial crisis. So
yes,
financial fragility is another key issue. Retraining and training workers, because our economies are dynamic. Some industries decline and new industries, for example, come up. We need to retrain workers to be aligned with the skills required for the new phase of growth.
Right.
So all of these areas will constitute the agenda to which you defined as reducing poverty, environmental, and so on.
Within the platform of New Development Bank, there is an issue, Leslie, that everyone has the equal share. That means equal say. And then when you have 5 emerging economies, equal say sometimes means long negotiations. So what does that mean to your work?
Sure. Look, I mean, I think that the model is still unfolding. It was an element built into the very fabric of the New Development Bank to have 20% each shareholding for each of the 5 countries. To date, it has served very well, because I think these 5 countries believe it's not about economic power and dominance. It's about persuading other member countries of your position and trying to work towards consensus. But at the same time, we will not hold up. If we don't have agreement from all of the 5 countries, progress is not going to be stunted. The important point I would like to make here is that each of the other 4 countries, their vision, their desires are very much in line with China's. We need to green our economies. We need to look at inequality. We need to deal with the financial system. So the 3 priorities that were set by the Chinese Communist Party at the Congress and now with the new policymakers having spoken here, these countries are aligned with that vision.
The New Development Bank was set up a few years ago, but now you see a new lineup of Chinese officials at different important positions. How do you think that will, in a way, create a necessity to further communicate and sharpen the vision for New Development Bank for the years ahead?
Most of the policymakers that are in their new roles, and this is a tradition of the Chinese policy system, are very experienced policymakers. So the fact that they now have a different responsibility does not mean that they are completely new to this area of work. They bring a depth of knowledge which we can then leverage from. So they bring knowledge from different parts of the system, which will enable us to be more effective in what we do. So there's a richness to that kind of change in personalities in different roles.
This is going to be 40 years reform opening up China.
Hopefully the next 40 years will be another miracle. The past 40 years have been a miracle, but as I said now, it will be a little bit more challenging to improve the quality of that growth as we spoke about.
Leslie Mastorp, the Vice President of the New Development Bank. Stay with us here on World Insight. Still to come on our program, we got up close to Sir Martin Sorrell, the CEO of WPP, about how businesses are dealing with a hostile global trading environment. He says uncertainty is the biggest worry for business from all over the world. The full Q&A right after this break.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it.
on TV screens, websites, mobile platforms and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
We have come a long way. Changes happen, and fast, from all corners, different lives, voices, and visions. Encouraged to think, enlightened to change. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei. China becomes the second largest economy in the year 2010 and is catching up with that of the United States when it comes to the overall GDP. How the two major powers interact concerns everyone on this planet, of course. On the sidelines of the China Development Forum in Beijing, I sat down with Sir Martin Sorrell, CEO of WPP. He explains his views about this changing world and particularly how businesses are functioning in a world in which trade disputes has become such a big issue. China, United States. What does it mean for the rest of the world, given your rich knowledge about how the world has evolved?
I don't know about the rich knowledge, but give you a view. Obviously, China or the United States and China dominate. If you look at the numbers, I think the world is about $72, $73 trillion. Last time I looked, I think the US was GDP. I think the US was around 20 and China was around 10 or 11. So yeah. China's growing more rapidly. We're not allowed to talk about numbers anymore, are we? It's around 6.5% is the indication. The US, of course, is not growing at that rate. It's increasing its rate. So it's probably inevitable that China will catch up with the United States at some point in time. Right. It'll take a few years, or not on a per capita basis.
But what would that mean?
Well, I think what it signals, and I think the origins of that we're starting to see, is one looks, for example, at technology and the growth in technology. And of course, there is a feeling in the West, true or not, that the Chinese, for the last few years, have been stealing technology. Right? But I think on the basis with my colleague Scott, we take 2 weeks out of our diary and we go and visit Chinese companies and foreign multinationals here. Not just in the coastal plain, yes, but in the interior. And the remarkable thing, we did this for the first time about 3 years ago, did it again last year. The remarkable thing is you are always impressed by the strategic thinking around technology and the execution. And for example, in the area of artificial intelligence, there are indications. America has the lead at the moment. You look at number of patents, you look at developments, look at companies, but the Chinese are rapidly catching up. And with the US administrations that we've had, not just this one, not just the Trump administration, but I think the Obama administration as well, I wouldn't say they were isolationist, but they certainly were less involved with various parts of the world, and that's left a vacuum. And the Chinese government has been increasing its soft power in a number of ways for a number of years. I mean, you go and look at Africa, you go and look at the Far East.
I always wondered, when the geopolitics has been evolving at such a speed, Sir Martin, what does it mean for business community?
Well, it increases levels of uncertainty because, you know, if you tried to list the risks that exist at this point in time, or 4 or 5 years ago, or 5 or 8 years ago, there's a whole list of them. But you know, you can drive yourself crazy trying to and you'd probably be wrong. If you look at the U.S. position, certainly the relationship between government and business post the Trump regime, you know, post the start of it, has been positive. So if you look at deregulation, you look at the tax bill, you look at what may be promised in the areas of infrastructure, and the relationship between government and business, it's much stronger than, frankly, it was under the Obama regime. You look here at China, strong government, stable government, strong policy, clearly articulated, filling that vacuum that I referred to, perhaps, that we see in the US. The Belt and Road Initiative clearly is an initiative that will boost China's position internationally. I think, though, what we're seeing play out here is the competitive environment, if you like, between the two major powers in the world, between the US and China.
So you are saying economies within themselves are developing with quite positive momentum. However, when it comes to interactions among these economies, there seems to be the possibility of friction. Is that what you're, qualities of conflict, rather?
There's cooperation and friction. I mean, I mentioned North
Korea.
Is
that the biggest danger for business community?
Well, uncertainty is the greatest danger. And for example, if you look at what's happened in the last week or so around trade and the issues of trade, free trade, fair trade, whatever, however you describe it, obviously that introduces an element of uncertainty. But what I'm saying to you is, if you try to legislate every 5 minutes for those areas of uncertainty, you wouldn't get anywhere. So take Brexit, for example. Okay, what do we do about Brexit? I wasn't particularly enthusiastic, you know, English understatement, about Brexit. But what I do believe is, now that it looks as though Brexit will go through, what WPP has to do is to make sure it maintains its influence in the 4 markets of Europe. So all I'm saying to you is, the uncertainties that are created by some of these tensions, some things are getting resolved, some things are not, new issues are being thrown up. I think you wouldn't get anywhere if you tried to cater for all of them, and the uncertainty you have to deal with. And we live in a world of tremendous volatility, uncertainty, that you have to deal with.
Think about the world, the changes that we have just mentioned. We thought technology would help us to communicate, to know better, probably to even seek a new road of development. But so far, we have not seen that happen yet, even though it gives certain momentum.
No, I'm not sure I agree with that.
Okay, go ahead.
I think the technology has given us a tremendous facility and tremendous ability to communicate. Now, whether we choose to use that or not, in the right way or the wrong way, we have to see.
That seems to be the problem. We don't have to see. We have some cases right now. For example, with Facebook recently, with Cambridge Analytica, things like that. This is only one of those many examples in which people are pondering and say, what are we embracing?
At its heart, somebody misled somebody about whether data had been destroyed or not. But at its heart, that is about privacy. I mean, interestingly, in China, the consumer seems to be less concerned about privacy. I mean, in terms of data, the amount of data you have in China outdistances any other nation on earth with 1.4 billion people. And Chinese consumers seem to be, at least at this point in time, relatively or more relaxed about the privacy issues. As a result of Cambridge Analytica, there's going to be an increasing focus on whether the consumer really understands when they sign up, when they agree and go onto a website, what they're letting themselves in for. So in that opt-in process, as we would call it, there has to be greater clarity. That's, I think, the message here. And of course, both Google and Facebook and Microsoft and, in fact, the Amazon and the two Chinese companies, Alibaba and Tencent, are all $500 billion companies.
Yes.
These are companies that have grown phenomenally and extremely powerful, and with power and size comes responsibility.
Right.
And I think in the case of Facebook and Google, increasingly they're starting to understand that they really, at their heart, are media companies just like you. They're not purely technology companies. They're media companies too. So it's getting to grips with understanding that and being responsible for the content and the placement of advertising, for example, in the context of that content becomes increasingly important.
But that's also crucial for your company. I mean, you have been experiencing this challenge of transferring your company. I know you work so hard. Ultimately, the ultimate direction, are we just trying very busy every day to catch up with what else is happening? Or actually we are trying to figure out a direction in which things are going?
Well, probably both. I mean, we see structural change, the digital disruption in production, in media, as you well know, and in distribution. And then we see cyclical pressures as well. Low interest rates for prolonged periods of time tend to cause asset allocation distortions. You see the rise of private equity.
Yes.
You see the rise of activist investors. You see the rise of what is known as zero-based budgeting approaches based on cost. This ups the pressure on the short-term pressure on the structural issues.
Sir Martin,
Thank you very much.
What a pleasure to see you again. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. It is the special edition to our program focusing on the U.S.-China trade issues. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.